Hello, Sam.
Hello, Adele. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Very well. Yeah, really good. The year is marching on,
Yeah, it is
just like
certainly
that.
marching on.
Yep.
So in our last podcast episode, we discussed survival resources, which are really good to understand in terms of the needs that get met with them and how we cope when we're going through trauma. But today we're discussing the growth resources. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And so let's just talk about what growth resources are. And it's about like its connection to self and its connection to others. And it can bring curiosity and openness. Like um there's a real sense of connecting, like because we are wired at a DNA level to be relational, aren't we? So I think growth resources are something around having a relationship with ourselves and having a relationship with others. And I did see an amazing acronym this morning called DREAM, and it was on Steve Bartlett's Diary of a CEO. And the dream was around D for discipline, R for routine, E for education, A for action, and M for mentality. And I thought that was quite a nice thing that just popped up this morning when we're talking about growth resources, because
Yeah.
anything that you want to do that moves you in the direction of a more desirable form, to quote John Lennon, requires some form of discipline and routine, doesn't it? And it requires some type of education. It requires an action to move towards, and it's got this kind of mental mindset. So yeah, talk about growth resources more to me.
Yeah, so I think the critical distinction between a survival resource and a growth resource is not, survival resource, it's designed, if you go back to the polyvagal kind of diagram and the
Yeah.
sort of theory, it's designed to kind of get you into action if you've been frozen or sort of stuck with something, or it's designed to kind of help you collapse and escape if you've been overcooking things. So it's designed to escape or flee or fly or fawn. It's exactly designed to get you to safety. A growth resource, it does the opposite. It does this connection with yourself and others. And what's key with a survival resource is you meeting the needs in the short term, but you're also undermining a whole bunch of other needs.
Yeah.
So for example, if you're drinking lots of alcohol to kind of like get to safety in your brain, you're kind of, oh, okay, I'll just drink all the drinks and do all the things. And in that moment, you're feeling better, but actually you're undermining your health, your well-being, like kind of in the long term.
Yeah.
A growth resource doesn't have an undermining factor. It's a net win. It's like, it's doing this connection of yourself to others, but it meets needs, but it doesn't undermine a whole bunch of other needs at the same time. So that's why the more growth resources we have in our lives and we build them into our routine, our structure, but also into our life and the way we organize our week and our days and that kind of thing, the more resilient you will be long term.
Yeah. And so what I hear in all of that is that it's a win-win. It's a net win overall, right? And so that does something quite deep to the organic self. And what we mean by organic self is that part that knows who you are. So it's got a certain kind of feel about it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It feels nourishing. It feels good for you. But what is crucial, and I really liked your dream kind of like acronym there. That was, the little anagram thing that you pulled together was brilliant, because I see it like I have a slightly separate kind of analogy that I use. Sometimes when you're implementing a growth resource, you've got to be a little bit like the athlete. If you're the swimmer, you're Michael Phelps, you get up in the morning at 4 o'clock and you're like, oh, I really can't be asked to like swim 10Ks today. That just sounds like a shit show.
Because they feel the same way as us, right?
They're like, oh, I just can't. And then that kicks in. No, put on your freaking trainers, put on your cozy, get in the pool, just get going. There's something where we've got to kick our ass a little bit with some growth resources. So some things we know they're good for us, but we don't really feel like it. So that is a little bit of discipline, a little bit of routine and structure that comes with a growth resource.
Yeah.
But then sometimes you also need to treat yourself like the patient, where you're like, oh, it's okay.
Yeah. And that's that compassion for yourself as well. That is actually a growth resource, isn't it?
It is.
Self-compassion, like not being so hard. Like we all know that we talk to ourselves in a way that we wouldn't necessarily talk to others.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. So the key is, you've got lots of really awesome growth resources. Okay, I'll use another analogy when this happens. Okay, so I have this analogy sometimes when I'm really super busy. I feel like I'm landed on a war zone and there's missiles flying overhead, and I'm super, like, I'm focused. I'm fighting the fight or the war that I'm fighting at the day. And then somebody like walks over to you and like taps you on the shoulder. Excuse me, do you have a paper clip? And you're kind of like, ugh. But the doesn't happen when you're really resourced.
Yeah.
Really, really resourced, and you have high resilience. That moment of switching from the really intense, stressful, physical, whatever action that you're on, to pausing to deal with a paperclip, something that's kind of annoying or frustrating. It's a request, and you didn't bite that person's head off. Then you know that you're really resourced.
Yeah, and the other thing about growth resourcing is that you don't realize how resourced you actually are. And so what I've noticed for myself, that when I'm in my own therapy, is that I haven't necessarily had that lens of, oh yeah, I did do that, or oh yeah, I do have that resource inside of me. And so we're wandering around almost like headless chickens sometimes, because we're not aware of how resourced we actually are and can be. A little bit of guidance, a little bit of nudging, and that's where that education part comes in from that DREAM acronym, is that like having some kind of awareness. And that's not necessarily academic education I'm talking about. That's what I mean by having that awareness. That in itself is educating and being more informed about what this does, what that feeling is like, that deep feeling that I talked about.
Definitely. And I think, I had a really tough day yesterday. 3 really hectic things happened, where somebody behaved unexpectedly, and it was very, very hurtful and disappointing. And what was really interesting, because I'd installed a lot of growth resources the day before, and I meditate most mornings, and I'd meditated the morning. These 3 really big things that had happened, had they happened 5 or 6 years ago, before I'd actually really got good at resourcing, oh man, I would have spiraled, like next level spiraling. But actually, what happened was I stood back from this rupture and this disappointment, and I kind of like observe it and sort of go, okay, that doesn't work for me. That doesn't resonate with my values. And actually, what feels like the best thing for me to do is to advocate, and this is what I'm doing. And that clarity just came because of the resiliency that was built because of the resourcing. So I cannot stress more highly how important resourcing is, because before I used to resource myself, I was just like, I just go shopping. Like I'd have a bad day and I'd be like, right, my husband and everyone would know that I've had a bad day because Adele just arrives with all the bags, and it's like, oh God, what has she done now?
Yeah.
And then I've met the need, but I've undermined my bank statement, or I've undermined like the remorse. Oh God, I should have bought that. I didn't think through it, So that survival resource, it doesn't feel nurturing in that way. So
yeah. And it just triggered a little memory for me as well. I used to when I lived in Scotland with my son, and I had my friend Annalise flatmate with us, and one of my resources at the time was, because we didn't have a lot of money, I was a single mum, and so I didn't have that resource to go shopping. And so what I would use as resourcing is I would clean the house. And so she would come home from work and she'd go, "What's wrong, Sammy?" And at the time, when I reflect back, if I could have just said, "I'm resourcing." Yeah. And so resourcing comes in all shapes and different sizes. So
it does.
We've got exercise that we're going to discuss this morning. We've got some music, dance music, like that's really deep deep core stuff, how music can impact on people.
Mm.
We've got journaling, we've got sleeping, we've got that self-compassion that we touched on, we've got nutritional, lifestyle medicine, and then, of course, we've got the breath work. So there's
Yeah.
a lot of stuff that you can do that actually doesn't cost you money to resource. What have
Yeah.
you used personally? So you've touched on meditation.
Yeah. So meditation, and it doesn't need to be like, oh my gosh, we need like an epic thing in the corner with a little statue and little candles, and like we like take an hour and it's a whole procedure. If you make the resource that you're implementing harder than like a space shuttle launch to the moon, like you're not going to get there. It's got to be something like you can snack on it throughout the day. It's like micro snacks of resources throughout the day. So that's a really important insight I had, was to stop getting this perfect like resourcing. So when I meditate, I literally, it's like 5 minutes, 5 minutes, 6 minutes. And I might meditate in between sessions. I'll just take a little pause. I might put on the Calm app or Headspace, one of those apps, and just kind of like, let's just do a mini meditation or mini like session for myself. So I think something like that is like a little snack where it's just like we've just down regulated the nervous system.
Yeah.
And we've just kind of got back to the rest and digest of the parasympathetic nervous system. And I layer resources on top of each other. So when I'm doing like my meditation, so I'll sit and I'll just do my meditation, I'll just be really calm. At the same time, I'm doing a breathing exercise. So I'm focusing on how I'm breathing.
Yeah.
At the same time, I'm also visualizing like my safe space. So that's another resource, is to visualize your safe space and kind of imagine I've got this little stream, my favorite little stream. It's in the South Island of New Zealand. And I'm like, there's a little stream. And I remember my husband and I sat there and we like, had a little picnic. And so I always travel there in my little brain. And I sit there and I'm like, and like after about 6 minutes of that, I'm like, I might as well have gone on vacation, because I'm like, boom, she's back.
Well, I was there with you right now. I was visualizing that little stream and I felt quite settled. So yeah, that's a really great example of you did that in your office.
Yeah. Just like, waiting before I chat with a client, or you got a gap somewhere and nobody needs to know. You put on your headphones, you close your eyes. No one needs to know what you're doing. You just have that little like snack of resource. So let's talk a little bit about so meditation. If you are not a meditator, don't panic. You start small. There's brilliant apps out there. You just put on an app. They have 5-minute apps, 6-minute apps. You can actually set the timer in Calm and Headspace and some of these apps. And they're apps designed for various things. What I also love on those apps is something called soundscapes. So soundscapes are noises of the sea or rain or meadow or forest or something like that. And sometimes if you just want that quiet, you just put on a soundscape instead of a whole guided meditation. So meditating is definitely one of them. Next one is breathing. How do you use breathing exercises, Sam?
Well, I like to use the box breath, which is, 4 seconds in, hold for 4 seconds, 4 seconds out, and then 4 seconds hold. So that's a really easy one that you can do. And when you're doing that, you're also visualizing this box. And because you're visualizing and then focusing on the breath, it's really difficult to cognitively do anything else. So it can take you out of maybe some anxiety or this ruminating that you can have, that, these repeated thoughts that you can't stop having. Box breathing can be really good for that. And then the other thing I like to do with my breathing is I like to take that really deep breath in down to the, where the abdomen kind of expands itself, but take a much longer breath out, because what that does to what we discussed, like that sympathetic dominant state, which is that high stress state, to the parasympathetic state, which is the rest and digest and calm meditative state. By taking a longer breath out, you're moving into a parasympathetic state. You're sending signals to the brain through gases and chemicals that go, I'm safe. So I like to also use that one. So, and I have done breath work. I'm trained in breath work as well. So that long breathing. Like I can do sessions with clients up to 30 minutes where we're really focused on a particular type of breath. But you would need to be kind of facilitated with that. But breath work is amazing. I know you use different types of breath work as well, right?
Yeah. So there's different, again, I'm a big fan of the layering because it's like a snack attack. You're snacking on the resource, but you're really layering in the resourcing with something else. So I'll sort of digress slightly and then come back to the breath work. So slight digression is that a tight pelvic floor can cause autonomic nervous system dysregulation. That's a really important thing. It constricts around the vagus nerve. So the vagus nerve runs from the pelvis through every organ in the body and into the amygdala in the brain. And when the pelvis is constricted, it actually activates the amygdala. So having a loose pelvis is super important to be resourced. It's like the weirdest little fun fact.
Really interesting, because I'm just thinking about how you hold a lot of emotion in your psoas minor and major, like that's all tied into your pelvis.
We're all,
that's
and it's interesting to also note that, like, when women have given birth and we're told to do all our pelvic floor exercises following that, how the volume of kind of postnatal depression and anxiety and that kind of thing that follows that, like, it's a good and bad thing to have a tight pelvic floor. But actually, when your pelvis is super tight all the time, you're sitting up straight like a ballerina all the time, or like your coat hanger is still stuck in your shirt all the time, you are not in that lovely rest and digest parasympathetic space. So there's some tips for releasing your pelvis. So when I do my breathing exercises, I'm doing the releasing of my pelvis at the same time. So here's some techniques for releasing your pelvis. Step number 1. First things first is you locate the tops of your pelvis, like the kind of hip, the bony bits over there, right? Then you locate underneath your butt, the sit bones. Okay. So you imagine now from the top of the hip to the bottom with the sit bones is like the sides of a rectangle, and then there's like the edges of the rectangle. So all this is like a box. Now what we do is we imagine squeezing the box super, super tight. We're like, so you imagine pulling up your wee. So I'm not going to wee. I'm just not going to wee. And now I release. But I release till my tummy super pooches out. Like it's gross. The muffin is over the top. Like it's bad, right? Release it super bad. Okay, so that's option 1. Option 2, what I do is I add in a little visualization at the same time. I imagine that as I'm pushing my pelvis out and releasing my wee, but be careful not to actually wee yourself. Releasing that kind of stress is I'm imagining pancake batter going into a pan, and the way it spreads right to the edges of the pan. I keep going until it's fully, fully released like that. And then the third is what the Americans use when they do the sniper training. So what they do, because you have to have a loose pelvis to actually take a perfect shot. I didn't know that. Another fun fact. You stare at a point on the wall and you just soften your peripheral vision. And notice when you soften your peripheral vision, your pelvis just drops.
So then that's your cranial nerves communicating with your vagus nerve.
Yeah, which is an even more powerful relax of the parasympathetic. So when I do my breathing exercises, just to go back to that, the breathing exercises I do the most, these are a bit noisy, but anyway, are the VU breath and the lunar breath. So the VU and the lunar, they're recommended by Peter Levine and Bessel van der Kolk in their works from a trauma perspective. So you breathe in, and when you breathe out, you make
the humming. The humming is really good.
VU is really important. It's got to be the V, because the way that your mouth actually formulates and the way your tongue is it drops the pelvis at the same time. So what I'm doing is when I do the VU breath, I'm also then imagining fully dropping my pelvis with the pancake batter spreading out all the way to the edges. So again, I like to layer my resources.
That sounds great. And what's the lunar? Where does the lunar come into this
The
view?
lunar does exactly the same, but it's a little bit more subtle. So the lunar breath isn't vu, but it does the same thing. So, and then also drops the pelvis at the same time.
Yeah, because I guess the vagus nerve's all attached to the diaphragm, and so you're really working quite a lot of muscle there, aren't you? Which is then sending different signals to the brain that I'm safe. Because one of the key things about survival resourcing, I guess, is that I don't feel safe. And so growth resourcing is that net win of you are safe.
100%.
Get down to real basics, right?
But what's crucial is to layer these into your day. You know, I'll be standing by the stove cooking and I'll drop my pelvis several times, or I'll be brushing my teeth and I'll focus on dropping my pelvis several times. I find the days where I snack on that in a way, and I do it several times during the day, I am super exhausted. So when I had my bad day yesterday, I'd done it several times the previous day. So yesterday when the proverbial SH1T hit the fan, I was ready for that big guy. You know, it didn't bother me.
Yeah. And so good tips for that are to, if you're not making yourself a cup of tea or a coffee or getting a glass of water, then maybe just practice some growth resourcing. And the more you practice it, I always, I liken it to a hose pipe. Like you just have to develop these new pathways till they become the dominant pathways,
That's
so
right.
We've got breathing, which is a form of exercise as well, right? We've got nice Pilates, yoga.
Tai Chi.
Walking.
I think a lot of people always think that they need to do hard out exercise. And that's not always a good idea. Why is that?
Well, you're increasing your cortisol levels, aren't you? So you're sending some mixed messages there. I think that's kind of 1 = 1. Yeah. So we're trying to bring in a parasympathetic state here, not a hypo, not a low parasympathetic state, but we're taking in this rest and digest where everything feels okay in the world.
Yeah.
It feels safe.
So these exercises are a little bit more like a lovely walk in the morning, to get that fresh sunlight into your eyes, to regulate your circadian rhythms.
Yes.
And that kind of slow paced walk for like 30 minutes clears a lot of cortisol out of the body.
Yeah.
Another resource is like stretching, yoga, Pilates, Tai Chi. So it's softer, gentler movements from an exercise perspective.
Yeah. And so you could also listen to so we've got breath work, we've got exercise, you've got some music that you can listen to. That's a very personal thing, but we all can identify, I think, that music has a deep impact on us.
Yeah.
And that's different for different people. But, you might have music which is slow and steady, Baroque music, like, classical music. You might go in with hard rock where you have a bit of a boogie. But again, it's telling the system something different, isn't it? Because it's got that feeling inside. And that feeling that I'm trying to it's difficult to articulate, but it's a deep, nourishing feeling that it feels okay and it feels like this is good for me.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about addiction. We're talking about, not talking about the survival resources where, that feels good for me in the short term. We're talking about a growth resource, which is moving towards that more desirable form. And so that's self-compassion that we talked about. And then journaling is something as well that you just get all your thoughts down on paper and reflect. And it's incredible about what can actually come up.
Yeah. I mean, narrative work, is very, very powerful from a psychological and psychotherapy perspective. So sometimes like writing and reflecting. And if you're not a big writer, you can record. I went through a year of processing something really difficult, and it was a grief, bereavement that was really, really painful for me. And every day when I would go on a walk, again, layering the resources, I would record myself. I'd just talk into my phone, and I would listen to the recordings again. And that processing was so valuable because it was like a self-coaching mechanism in a way, where I was aware of how I was traveling through the grief, but kind of coaching myself. And then I delete the recording and then record another one. And like, so there was this processing that was happening at the same time. So journaling, whether you write or you actually verbally process, it's really, really powerful to kind of have that as a resource too.
Yeah, and that just touches on that kind of self-perception theory, doesn't it? Where, you know, when I hear myself speak, I believe what I hear. And so, again, that touches in with that self-compassion, like being careful of how you speak to yourself.
Yeah.
We're not even aware sometimes of our internal dialogue with ourselves, and that gets into parts work. But you know, that's beyond what we're talking about today. But I also want to talk about nutrition and some herbal medicine too that can be a really amazing growth resource. So while you're changing habits, because essentially what we're saying here is that we're changing a habit, we're making some significant change in our life. And we all know that change is difficult unless we're really prepared and got that mental lens, you know, that kind of acuity of, yeah, this is what I'm aiming for. This is a visualization. Nutrition and herbal medicine can be a really good resource for that. So making sure that, you know, you've got enough. Do you need magnesium to help just, you know, settle the system to go to sleep at night? Because sleeping is incredibly important. But is it the right magnesium? You know, like if we're looking at like a magnesium citrate or an aspartate, which is, you know, good for ATP productivity. But we maybe want to look at more like a magnesium glycinate, which it's bound to glycine, so it helps through GABA pathways, which is inhibitory. So you're making sure that you're getting the correct advice on the type of magnesium that you might need. You know, a lot of us don't think about the importance of zinc, but zinc's in, you know, at least 500 biochemical reactions in the body, and the nervous system requires zinc. So, you know, have we got the right type of zinc? There's various types of zinc that they're bound to. When I say bound to, like they're bound to certain aminos, if you like, or they're chelated with something to help them kind of get into the cell. And do they need cofactors? Like, are you looking at B vitamins that, you know, zinc and B6 go really well together, for example, particularly good for ADD or ADHD. You would look at those two nutrients together. Then there's herbal medicine, like we've got GABA A, B, and C in our brain. It's kind of like it's got this kind of plasticity around our GABA receptors. And there's certain types of herbs that have an affinity for specific GABA receptors, and GABA is inhibitory, and so it helps settle the system, particularly if you're feeling anxious in that sympathetic dominant state. So you might be looking at things like withania, also known as ashwagandha. You might be looking at Californian poppy. You might be looking at chamomile. You might be looking at kava. But, you know, before you go and do those or purchase those herbal medicine yourself, maybe, you know, approach a herbalist so it's a bit more bespoke. And then a qualified herbalist can also look at, you know, being mindful of drug herb interactions, because, you know, that's also something to be mindful of. But these are amazing resources that you can have that, you know, can be long-term, can be short-term, but again, seeking medical advice or healthcare advice before going ahead with those.
I think a lot of the points of resourcing is to kind of return to a simpler life.
Yeah.
We've overcomplicated our lives massively, and our access to survival resources and dopamine hits are 2,000 a day. I mean, it's insane. And so what we want to do is go back to back in time, really, back to 1930s, 1940s values, where maybe we bake some bread and you're kneading the dough, or you're in the garden and you're kind of weeding, you know, or you're kind of making a meal from scratch, very slowly, very steadily, like doing things slowly, deliberately, quietly, with intention. What that actually does is it moves you into that rest and digest space, and it massively increases your HRV rate. We were talking about the heart rate variability in our previous episode. It's like when you have higher HRV levels, you know that your parasympathetic nervous system is happy, and you know that you're resourced well. You know that you can handle all the paper clips on the front line of the wall. So you're eating well, you're slowing things down, you're taking a pause, you're breathing, you're resting, you're having little snacks of resources throughout the day. You're talking nicely to yourself, you know, you're talking to yourself with kindness. You're validating your own needs. All that is part of the kind of self-compassion muscle that we want to really learn to perfect and build on.
And I think the common thread throughout all of those, lovely summary is time. Taking the time for yourself. And we've got rushing men syndrome, rushing women syndrome, rushing person syndrome. It's just not working for us anymore. We're in this world of instant gratification. And to be honest, growth resourcing is a process of delayed gratification.
And slowing down massively.
It really is. Yeah.
And because you can say, oh, I installed like 20 resources today. Yes, but at what speed were you doing that? Because if you're highly focused and industrious as you're implementing that resource, you've literally just made it a survival resource. So the thing with growth resources, it's about pauses, stops, rests, micro installations throughout your day. And the more complex your life is, the more resources you need to have scattered throughout your day, your week, your months. And the more resourced you are, the more resilient you will be to tackle anything that comes up in life.
So I'm feeling like I need to kind of put together an acronym for pause. And, it could be pause and dream, or dream and pause. And, just taking that time. Sounds like a cliche, but we really are needing to do that as a population. It's not working for us. We live in a society where your output is the biggest value, but in actual fact, it's not. Your relationship with yourself and others is the biggest value. And the older I get personally, the more I'm realizing that actually that is probably the most important thing to me,
And I think if you're listening to this episode and you kind of find yourself thinking, gosh, like I've literally got millions of survival resources, I want to install some growth resources into my world. The thing to do is to kind of go through a little bit of a checklist for yourself, like a daily checklist and a weekly checklist. Like, what are some things that make me feel super connected to myself or to others? Like, is it walking the dog? Is it going for a hot bath? Is it a face mask? Is it playing a round of golf with my mates? Is it something in the garden? Is it banging, nail into a wood? Is it chopping wood? Is it like pruning a bush? Is it baking some bread? Is it breathing exercises? Is it dropping your pelvis? There are actually hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of possible things that we can do that have that net gain. Yeah. And start to really prioritize, as Sam said, putting that into your life and deliberately creating and scheduling intentional moments of slowing down.
Yeah. Start with a minute a day. Nothing to lose, everything to gain. Yeah. Next week, we're going to talk about insomnia. So I'm really looking forward to that.
That's going to be awesome.
It's quite a loaded word.
And so many people suffer from insomnia, habitually, but also at stages of life or stages of stress. Yeah. So we're going to be talking about all of that, like looking at your circadian rhythm and all of the things associated to insomnia.
Yeah, and there'll be, that'll be quite loaded, so there'll be a few episodes. Yeah. Looking forward to it. Until next time.
Take care. Take care.
Bye.
The information shared on the Naked Insights podcast is for educational and information purposes only, and is not intended as a substitute for professional therapy or counseling. While we aim to provide helpful and accurate insights, individual experiences may vary. If you're experiencing trauma, mental health issues, or distress, please seek guidance from a qualified professional. The views expressed by us as the hosts are our own and do not necessarily reflect the opinions or positions of any affiliated organizations.